Welcome to the Confidence Through Health podcast. My name is Jerry Snyder. As a health, wellness, and sports performance coach, my goal each week is to bring you experts to help you take control of your health and build your self-confidence. Thanks for including me today on your journey to better health. As an elite level runner and coach, I'm excited to introduce you to the All In Running Club. The All In Running Club exists to help you become a better runner. Whether you're a beginner, an elite runner, or anywhere in between, the mission of the All In Running Club is to give you the tools you need to find your success in running. Join today to take advantage of the 75% off yearly membership rate offer. Click the link below in the show notes to learn more. Okay, thank you, Dr. Livingston, for being a guest on the Confidence Through Health podcast.
Thank you for having me here. You could please call me Glenn.
I will. So, Glenn, you have a history both as a practitioner, but also your own experience, which has led you to where you are now. And so tell everybody a little bit about how you dealt with your own personal issues, if you will, with food, and how you're now translating that into helping other people figure out how to do it.
Do you mean my 25-year nightmare with food?
Exactly, yes.
Yeah. Well, I'm not just a doctor who decided to work with overeaters.
Right.
If you pass by the Woodbury Country Deli in the 90s and they're out of Pop-Tarts and pizza, there was a good chance I was there before you. I'm 6'4", and genetically, I'm modestly muscular, like just lucky. And what that means is when I was a kid, 16, 17, 18 years old, if I worked out for a couple hours a day, I could eat whatever I wanted to. I mean, whole pizzas, 2 pizzas, boxes of muffins, boxes of chocolate bars. It didn't matter. In retrospect, I was spending too much time going to the bathroom and sleeping it off. But otherwise, I was thin and happy, and there were no problems at all. I thought it was great. Yeah. Fast forward to when I'm 21, 22 years old, and I get married, and I go to graduate school with a 2-hour commute each way to see patients and take classes. And I get home and my wife wants to talk about, her day, and we have to work on the business together. And I didn't have 2 minutes. I did a workout, much less 2 hours. But I found the food still had a hold of me. And my metabolism was slowing also, but the food still had a hold of me. Yeah. And I'd be, it's like it had a life of its own. And I'd be sitting in a session with a client, and they could be talking about suicide or something really serious. Mm-hmm. And I could be thinking, well, when can I get the next pizza? Right. And I never lost anybody. I think I compensated by working really hard and paying close attention, but I wasn't there to lend them my soul in the way that you really need to lend people your soul to do a really great job. And I'm from a family of 17 psychotherapists. So it's just the most important. Yeah. When I was, used to have my friends come over and lie down on the couch and tell me about their mother. That's it was my family. It was like something breaks in the house. Everybody knows how to ask it how it feels, and nobody knows how to fix it. Right. But all kidding aside, psychology was always at the center of my soul. It's what I wanted to do, and you have to lend people your soul in order to get them to love and trust you enough to think new thoughts and get out of the comfort zone. It's not really like solving a jigsaw puzzle. Like, yeah, doc, that's great. I'll get right on that. You just rotate this piece of it. Doesn't work like that. Right. So that's what bothered me more than the weight. I was gaining a little weight back then, but much more so, I just wasn't present. And coming from the family that I came from, I went the traditional route, which means I figured that there must be a hole in my heart. Mm. And if I could heal the hole in my heart, then I wouldn't have to heal the hole in my stomach. Mm. And so I went to see the best psychologists and psychiatrists, and went to Overeaters Anonymous, and I went on a spiritual journey, and I took medication, and I did everything you could imagine in and around the New York area. Mm-hmm. And it was a very enriching experience. I think it made me more compassionate for myself. I think it made me a lot more loving person. Mm-hmm. But every time I do something new, I get a little thinner and a lot fatter, a little thinner and a lot fatter. Right. Over the course of about 25 years, because I started getting better around the time I was 40, but over the course of around 25 years, there were a couple of things that happened that eventually flipped my paradigm from, fix the wounded hole in your heart or nurture your inner wounded child back to health, mm-hmm. to being the alpha wolf of my own mind.
Mhm.
When an alpha wolf is threatened for leadership, it doesn't go, "Oh my goodness, someone needs a hug." It
Yeah.
growls and it snarls and it says, "Get back in line or I'll kill you."
Right.
Um, really, what happened was that through the consulting I was doing for industry, because my wife at the time, we're divorced now, but
Hmm.
she traveled for business. So I
Hmm.
had a lot of time on my hands and I started a second career.
Hmm.
And that second career was consulting for industry, mostly big food, a little bit big pharma. I was
Okay.
on the wrong side of the war, just definitely on
Right.
the wrong side of the war, making a lot of money, but on the wrong side of the war.
Yeah.
And and I saw that they were engineering what amounted to a very external force that influenced overeating in the culture.
Right.
They were spending tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars on rocket science to engineer these hyper palatable concentrations of starch and sugar and salt and excitotoxins. And it's all geared at hitting the bliss point in your reptilian brain
Right.
without giving you enough nutrition to feel satisfied. And,
Right.
so you wind up looking for love at the bottom of bags and boxes and containers. And every time you do, there's some fat cat in a white suit with a mustache laughing all the way to the bank, right?
Right.
It's not quite that bad, but it's something like that.
Yeah.
And I said, you know what? This is an external force. This has
Hmm.
nothing to do with whether my mama dropped me in my head or I've got a hole in my heart or her mama dropped her in her head. This is an external force, and it's overwhelming.
Yeah.
It's overwhelming, and I started to learn that there are some chemicals in the packaging that can turn off your ability to know when you're hungry or full.
Hmm.
Um, I saw that the advertising industry was also very good at pushing our evolutionary buttons.
Right.
Like I remember this food bar manufacturer that told me one of the most profitable things they did was take the money from the vitamins they were putting into the bar, took the vitamins out of the bar, and they put it into the packaging instead.
Mm.
And if you have these multicolored, diverse,
Right.
packages, it signals the brain that there's a diversity of micronutrients available. That's where we're told to eat the rainbow.
Right. Right.
Red tomatoes and blueberries and yellow carrots and green lettuce.
Yeah.
You're going to get a diversity of micronutrients. But here they took the nutrients out. So it's kind of predatory. It's kind of
Yeah.
and I said, so here I am trying to love myself thin, but there are these external forces that have nothing to do with my psychology. And I remembered at some point something I'd studied in neurology when I'm a PhD, not an MD.
Hmm.
But we had a course in neurology, and they explained to us that the seat of the survival drives, um, fight or flight, feast or
Hmm.
famine,
Right.
that's the part that's responsible for food addiction.
Hmm.
That part of the brain, the reptilian brain, doesn't know love. When it looks at something in the environment, let's say this is the reptilian brain, it's like a bad college drinking game. Do I eat it? Do I mate with it? Or do I kill it?
Right.
Eat, mate, or kill. There's no love there. It's
Right.
the mammalian brain that inhibits this eat, mate, or kill impulses and says, before you eat, mate, or kill that thing, what impact does that have on the people that you love and your tribe and your loved ones?
Right.
And then it's the neocortex on top of that that says, wait, before you eat, mate, or kill that thing, what impact is that going to have on your long-term goals like health and fitness and weight loss and also music and spirituality and art and everything that really
Right.
makes you human in our society, your
Yeah.
contribution. So this thing doesn't know love, right?
Right.
So I realized that if I'm at a Starbucks and there's a chocolate bar on the counter, and I tried to make a rule that said I'm not going to have chocolate during the week,
Hmm.
and I hear this little voice in my head that says, you know what, Glenn? You worked out hard enough. A couple of bites of chocolate are not going to hurt you. You can just start again tomorrow. It'll be just as easy. I'll say, wait a minute. That's my reptilian brain. That's not me.
Right.
That's not me. Okay. So I did a little more than that at that point. I decided to do something a little crazy, which I was always embarrassed when I get to this point in the story because I'm a
Yeah.
really sophisticated psychologist and
Right.
see me in all of these, periodicals, and I'm sure you read them in my introduction.
Yeah.
And I was not going to teach this. This was a private thing.
Hmm.
But I decided to call my reptilian brain my inner pig. You don't have to do this anymore. You can call it your
Right.
food monster, whatever you.
Right.
I called it my inner pig.
Okay.
And then I said, I'm going to use this bright line in the sand, like I'll never have chocolate on a weekday again. And then when my pig said that, go ahead, it'll be just as easy to start your diet tomorrow. You're not going to gain any more weight. I would say, wait a minute, that's not me. That's my pig. And chocolate on a Wednesday is pig slop. I don't eat pig slop. I don't let farm animals tell me what to do. I wouldn't say this out loud. This would be in my head.
Right. Sure.
Right.
Sure.
Okay. I now know that what I did was create a tripwire that just alerted to me when the reptilian brain was active. The brain is really a calorie acquisition machine, and it wants to automate these habit loops. And what I know the reason this worked was because I created this tripwire and I kind of woke up at the moment of impulse. And at first I just had a few extra microseconds to remember what the right choice was and make it if I wanted to. I can't say I made it every time, but more often than I could before. What was a miracle was that I no longer felt confused. I no longer felt like there was a mysterious force inside of me. It was like I was awake and I could make a difference if I want to. I didn't always want to, but I could. From there, I started to mess around with things that I could do with this space. I tried to figure out how to open up the space a little more. And then when I was awake, I would say, well, what is the excuse that my pig is making? And in this case, where it would say it'll be just as easy to start tomorrow, I would say, you know what? That's actually not true. I would try to disempower or logically refute what the pig was saying. It's actually not true. The principle of neuroplasticity says what fires together wires together. So if I have a craving for chocolate on a Wednesday, and I say to myself, it'll be just as easy, or I let my pig say, it'll be just as easy to start tomorrow. And then I have the chocolate, I will have reinforced the craving, and I will have reinforced that thought. So that tomorrow, I'm more likely to have the craving, and tomorrow, I'm more likely to have the thought that says, just start tomorrow. And that's why these things start to cycle down. And so then I say, well, what's the real truth? Well, the real truth is you can only ever use the present moment to be healthy. If you're in a hole, stop digging, right? So I'd come up with these mantras for all these ridiculous excuses that my pig had for me overeating. That helped a lot. Now, it took me personally a couple of years to go through all of the excuses and keep a journal and everything. I eventually wrote a book and saw 2,000 clients over 8 years and figured out how to get this done a lot faster, like in a month or two. But it helped a tremendous amount. And nowadays, when we offer the program to people to teach them how to fix their thinking about food, to remove all these excuses, we get about an 89% reduction in overeating in the first month. So it's really for the people who engage with the program. Some people buy programs and they don't do anything. I don't know why, but for the people who engage with the program, it drops down around the 6-month mark to like 55 or 60%. And that's comprised of people who stay with it and people who give up. But why do people give up? So in the last year or two, I became very interested in why people give up. And I didn't give up, even though I didn't have a program or someone to talk to about this. I did this very privately for years before I marketed it. Why do people give up? So I started asking my clients what would happen. And they said, well, eventually you get to this point where you get this screw it, just do it response. Screw it, just do it. And I said, yeah, but why? Why would you say that? And there were a series of answers like fatigue, or they missed some nutrition. They skipped a meal, or they had something really high glycemic before, or some sugary treat that unbalanced their blood sugar, or they weren't drinking enough water. You and I were talking about water before the show. Or they didn't get enough sleep, or they haven't had enough social contact, or they're overwhelmed by decision making. Turns out willpower is nothing more than the ability to make good decisions, and you can only make so many good decisions every day. And so if you live in an environment where you're making decision after decision, not just food decisions, but like how many emails do I have to decide what to do with, you know, your impulse control goes way down, your executive function goes way down. These all fall under the rubric of what I would call organismic distress. That's what psychologists would call organismic distress, and then I put together that, what's happening here is that the brain experiences a false emergency, a semi-emergency, and it says we need resources. See, the way that the layers of the brain are set up, the reptilian brain can actually push aside the upper brain when it perceives there to be an emergency. And thank God it can, because otherwise we couldn't run away from a hungry bear. We'd be too involved in staring at a pretty flower, right? Or a pretty woman or man, or what it might be, what the case may be. And so I said, okay, well, at least now we know what's happening. So what we need to do is figure out how do we not only wake up, but calm that false sense of emergency. How do we do that? A lot of it is traditional self-regulation, regular, reliable nutrition, sleep, water. You can't get away from that. There's no way to trick your body. You like Stephen Covey would say, you can't cram on a farm. You have to plant the seeds and do the work and till the fields. And you can't cram on a farm. It's kind of the same way. There's some things you can't do. However, there's some things you can do also. One of the easiest things is breathing. I once had a date with this woman, and she found out what I did for a living, and she said, "Oh, well, I used to be a binge eater, and so I started doing yoga for 20 minutes every night, and now I don't binge eat at all. I don't even want to." I said, "That's really interesting." I happen to be into yoga. I happen to go just about every day, and I wasn't thinking about it my binge eating. I started after I stopped binge eating. And I asked a bunch of the teachers why that would be. And they said, well, we really have two nervous systems. We have the sympathetic nervous system, which gets us all revved up for an emergency. And that's when the feast or famine signal kicks in and says, just hand over the chocolate and nobody gets hurt, right?
Right.
But then we also have the parasympathetic system that says, well, we have everything we need right now, and there's no emergency. This is a good time to think and plan and execute on your rational plans and try to build a better life tomorrow. Rest, digest, and plan. And she said, in yoga, the type of breathing that we teach, it takes you through the discomfort in the sympathetic nervous system, and it takes you out of that and into the parasympathetic system. And then I started talking to some people. Laurie Hammond is a hypnotist who, this is not hypnosis what I do at all, but she happens to be a hypnotist. And she taught me about a type of breathing called 7-11 breathing, where you breathe in for a count of 7 and out for a count of 11. Essentially, you're breathing out for longer than you're breathing in. And that helps you move to the parasympathetic system, which is a state of relaxed wakefulness, a state of relaxed being rather than urgent doing. It helps you move there because if there was an emergency, if you were running from a hungry bear, you'd be going, you wouldn't have time to breathe out for longer than you breathe in. So the brain is kind of set up to know that breathing out for longer than you breathe in means that there's nothing wrong. We have what we need right now. And so I started having people do that breathing the moment that their tripwire went off. So the way my system works is you start with one simple rule. Could be, I'll never go back for seconds. The moment they experience themselves wanting to go back for seconds, that's their tripwire. Okay, now you become aware of your breath and you take a 7-11 breath or 3. And you bring yourself back into your parasympathetic system. Then you can say, well, why does my pig or my food monster think that I should break my rules and overeat right now? And a few more breaths, and then you start to disempower the the sympathetic nervous system again. And you say, why is the pig wrong? We can go into more of the things the pig says and why it's wrong if you want. But the point here is that by integrating the breath into the fixing of the thought, we were more effective and people were less likely to say, screw it, just do it. Then I had people starting to take decision-free breaks throughout the day. So a couple of times a day, even if you have to put your phone down and go to the toilet, and close the door so your 5 kids can't get in and bother you. Even if you have to do that, 5 minutes a day, twice a day makes a difference. It seems like our willpower recharges a little bit when we do that. We started paying very careful attention to how people were eating, and it turns out that most overeaters, like most people who overeat beyond their own best judgment, also are very good dieters too. They go together.
Right.
People
Yep.
live on this kind of feast and famine roller coaster.
Yep.
Now, if you think about it on an evolutionary basis, if we existed in an environment where food was very scarce, then the moment it was available, we would want to hoard it.
Right.
And so what are you doing when you're dieting and then binging and dieting and binging and dieting and binging? You're signaling your brain that you live in this feast and famine roller coaster, and that the moment that food's available again, you better like dislodge your jaw and shove the delicatessen tray into
Right.
it.
Right.
And so we developed this phrase, flood your body with nutrition at a slight caloric deficit if you want to lose weight. The fastest way to lose weight is slowly. Because every time you go on a crash dieting, you take it off, you're training your body, you live in that scarce environment, and then boom, it's all the way. That's why I was getting a little thinner, a lot fatter, a little thinner, a lot fatter.
Right.
So we try to have people aim for 1 pound a week or so, maybe 2 if they're a lot heavier.
Yeah.
Sometimes the first month, really heavy people can go faster.
Sure.
But usually when I hear people losing weight more than 1 pound or 2 at most per week, I get scared because it's almost always followed by the opposite way. So flood your body with nutrition at a slight caloric deficit.
Yeah.
Then we looked at the kind of natural need for dopamine in the brain, which is the pleasure response,
Right.
and ways to stimulate that. Like, the brain is set up to release dopamine when there's an unexpected source of nutrition or calories that's found. And so when people are, a lot of people get into a rut, they eat the same thing all the time, and that's actually really bad for your natural need for dopamine.
Right.
If you can find 1 to 2 dozen recipes that you really like and rotate them in, so there's several weeks in between, maybe even a month in between when you get to have it, and your brain is always surprised and say, oh my God, this is great, and you get more dopamine like that. You can also look at the brain's natural need for dopamine in other ways, like what else is it that gives you pleasure? I have a list of silly movies that I like. Blazing Saddles, The Man with Two Brains. I like really funny movies.
Yeah.
Or sitcoms that you like, or maybe you don't have time to do that, so you just have. I have pictures of my old hiking expeditions. My dog, my dogs when they were puppies. My niece and nephew when they were puppies, when they were kids.
Right.
But you can make a list of things that can hit your dopamine, and you can turn to those at the times when you would normally turn to food for it. So I could go on and on. I feel like I've been going on for 20 minutes. So
so to hit a couple things, and so the tripwire, right? Like, so whatever that is for you, and it's different for everybody. That's one of the difficult things, is that, like, it's not just an easy thing like, oh, okay, here's everybody's tripwire, just avoid that, right? Like, everybody's just different. But that's it. Not understanding what that is for you, is that one of the leading things for people when they say, oh, I just have no willpower when it comes to X. It's you don't understand how the tripwire works.
So a tripwire is different than a food signal.
Okay.
A tripwire is something you create in your brain so that when the reptilian brain is activated by something in the environment, it wakes up. Okay. So you could say, I always put my fork down between bites. It's a very black and white rule.
Right.
It's important to start with something simple and a fairly low bar. But I always put my fork down between bites. Well, then the moment that you feel, everybody does have a different tripwire, and finding the right simple rule is important. But let's go over and talk about triggers instead. Cravings occur in response to things in our environment.
Right.
They occur in response to stimuli. The reason for that is that we had to be very, very good. 100,000 years ago, we had to be very, very good at identifying when food was available.
Right.
So let's think about it. And this is why, by the way, if you have stronger cravings than most people, it's not a sign of a disease or a sickness. It's a sign that you have a healthy brain, which is being perverted by industry in the modern food environment. Right. But 100,000 years ago, if you were really good at identifying when food might be available. Let's say you're a caveman, we'll call you Thag, Thag, just because I like the name. I don't know why.
Okay.
So Thag one day sees a monkey
Mhm.
and follows that monkey, and that monkey leads him to a banana tree.
Right.
And Thag is ecstatic. He consumes mass quantities. He brings mass quantities back for his wife. And from then on in, when Thag sees a monkey, his brain secretes a whole bunch of dopamine and gets him all excited to follow the monkey.
Right.
Thag's brain learned really quickly that a monkey was a food signal for bananas.
Right.
Now, in the modern food environment, we have logos and packages
Sure.
and coloring. There are other things also, but you could be passing a donut store and you see the donut store logo and you start to salivate as that's happening, and you
Right.
develop this kind of automated routine, and people don't even after a while remember pulling in, making the right turn, finding a parking
Right.
spot, stopping the car, turning off the keys, walking in, going down the aisle, getting what they want, going to the cashier, et
Yeah.
cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It
Yeah.
just feels like an automated behavior because the
Right.
brain is trying not to waste energy. It wants to make everything very efficient.
Right.
So the behaviors we call food stimuli, those are external for the most part.
Mhm.
The tripwire is something that you set up that's internal. Like,
Gotcha.
I'll never eat chocolate on a weekday again.
Right.
Part of overcoming overeating is identifying both.
Gotcha.
Identifying what you want your tripwire to be, which is how you want to behave. How do you define healthy eating?
Yeah.
And then once you know what that is, what are the things that set off that tripwire in the environment that make your reptilian brain want to cross the line? Does that make sense?
Yes, totally. And
Yeah.
so, like, from the thing that I immediately started thinking about when you're talking about, like, following the monkey, and like in how advertising nowadays has taken us, because I can say this without singling out a single company, because everybody has jumped on, once September hits, what are you told is a must have, no matter what the temperature outside is something with pumpkin spice.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's like, boom, whether it's a coffee, whether it's a, delicatessen, whatever it is, it's like, we've got your pumpkin spice. Everybody's advertising for it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like you automatically start this, like, oh, okay, it's September. Boom, this is coming. And
the
then
season becomes a food cue for the availability of pumpkin spice. Yep.
Yeah. And so, and it's like, and then it's like, of course, well, it's only here for so long, so you got to take advantage of it. And yes, that drives people into that specific store, that restaurant, whatever it is, to get that item, and then be hit with a barrage of other things, right? Like, oh, the pumpkin spice is going away, but here comes the peppermint, whatever, because the seasons are changing. And so that's part of that advertising piece that you talked about, right? Like, it's like, we're going to drive this stuff and formulate it in a way that, like, I don't know how many people I know that have told me, like, I can't stand pumpkin spice, but I still go buy this stuff, because it's just like, it's
because 100,000 years ago, food really was scarce, and so you had to get while the getting was good.
Right.
And so when you're hit with that experience, and these are rich sources of calories, like this is fat and sugar and oil usually in those drinks.
Yeah.
And you think it's not going to be there. If you don't really stop to think about it, your brain's going to automate the behavior and say, we better get while the getting is good.
Right.
Yeah.
And so being able to have that moment to say, and so for some people that may be their tripwire is something with pumpkin spice. If I see that, I have to stop and think, what's actually in this? Is it something I want? Or, like, okay, I can have one a week, versus, like, every time I see
question I would ask, if you were struggling with pumpkin spice lattes, I'd ask you what role you wanted them to play in your life.
Mm-hmm.
Some people would say none. I want them out of my life. Other people would say, I want to have one a week.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, okay, well, in what context do you want to have that? And maybe you'd say, maybe Saturdays after I worked out.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the reason that works is because, could you imagine a casino where the slot machine only paid off on Saturday afternoon?
Yeah.
Do you think you'd see all those ladies stuck on the slot machines all week long?
Right.
You wouldn't bother to go to the casino.
Yeah, exactly.
Because your brain doesn't want to waste energy. If you really if you set up your tripwire in that way, that I will only ever again have pumpkin spice, no more than one, and only on Saturday afternoons, then you enter what we call an extinction curve for the rest of those situations. And the other food stimuli gradually become less relevant.
Right. Cool. So when someone becomes like food obsessed, like, and they start to, realize like, okay, I'm food obsessed, and I would imagine it could be any kind of food, like, because everybody's different and everybody's cravings are different for what they feel is going to give them the dopamine hit. So when they get to that point, is that similar to like other addictions where it's like,
I have a different model of addiction than most people do. I don't really think that it's an illness. I think that it's a byproduct of our brain's desire to automate the acquisition of pleasure. And food obsession is one of the correlates of food addiction, where you can't stop thinking about that muffin or that pizza, or like what I was experiencing in the sessions that I was doing. What most people don't know, though, is that food obsession is driven by possibility. So it's kind of like if you go through a toy store with your 3-year-old and they know you're only going to get them a toy on Saturdays, eventually they figure out it doesn't pay to throw a tantrum during the week. Same phenomenon as the slot machine people. But if any particular a strong enough tantrum could get you to give in and buy them a toy, then they're gonna attempt to get that toy all the time. And it's the same with food. If you think that a strong enough craving is going to result in you getting that pumpkin spice latte on a Tuesday afternoon, then you're going to start to and you give in to that. You're going to start to find yourself obsessed with the pumpkin spice lattes all the time.
Right.
There's a reason for this. Go back to 100,000 years ago and assume that Fag keeps following monkeys to banana trees.
Right.
And eventually the season wears on and the banana trees go scarce. And one day he follows a monkey to a tree and there's no bananas. There are no bananas. And most people think, well, maybe Fag's brain would give up at that point. But that's not really the most effective thing to do. There's more survival value in following monkeys that leads to trees 80% of the time than having no monkeys to follow at all.
Right.
So as a matter of fact, what Fag's brain will do is double down on the dopamine and motivate him even more to follow monkeys because he thinks that maybe bananas have become randomly available. So the brain starts to test for that, and you get even stronger cravings if you randomly reinforce the craving. Okay. The phenomenon even exists if the monkey only leads to bananas 20% of the time, because it's better to have a 20% monkey than no monkey at all.
Sure.
So that's the same thing with food. If you really want to extinguish your cravings for the pumpkin spice latte during the week, then you have to go through maybe 30, 40 days of only having it in those very specific conditions on the weekend after you work out. Right. And your brain will go through an extinction curve. At first, the little honeymoon period, and then you'll have the where the F is my latte response, right?
Yep.
That's called an extinction burst. That's your brain testing out to see if it's become randomly available. Okay. That's your brain doubling down, trying really hard.
Right.
If you don't do anything about that, most people quit at that point.
Sure.
They feel like they must be doing something wrong, but it's because you're doing something right.
Yeah.
When you get to that point, if you go through, it goes down pretty steadily after that. And they have a couple of little small bursts at the end. And then after about a month, maybe 40 days, your brain will label that particular signal for the pumpkin spice latte as dormant. Maybe it was the coffee shop during the week. It'll label it as dormant, and it won't bother you anymore about it. It will never erase the learning, because the brain, if for some reason those calories should become available again, the brain wants to take advantage of it right away. So unfortunately, you can't you can label it dormant so it doesn't bother you. This
Okay.
is why I say, if you have escaped a craving, either by deciding you're never going to do it again, or by putting it in a particular context, don't and you've climbed over that prison wall, don't go back in to visit your friends. Like
Right.
stay with your rules, keep going.
Yeah.
And the craving will become dormant. It won't bother you.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's like, that can be difficult for people, like in social settings, right? Because like, okay, I'm dealing with this and I've got it. And then whether it's a holiday social setting, right? Or just, birthday parties or just happy hours or whatever, it's like, that can be like, especially when you're starting out. Like you said, okay, you've got your honeymoon, you go through that and you're great because you're like, oh, I just started this, I'm going to do it, I'm going to do that. But then 2 weeks in and you're like, whether it's, you add on the stress of a day that's really tough or whatever, and it's like, oh my gosh, now I found myself in this setting where I have to be very conscious of what I'm doing to be able to avoid and be able to make sure that I know where my tripwire is so that I don't go over that line, right? Is that one of the most difficult things for people?
It's one of the most difficult things for people, but there are fairly simple solutions. First of all, you want to recognize that you teach people to exercise, I would imagine, yes?
Right. Yes.
Yeah. So when you first teach them how to do squats, you probably put a bar on their shoulder, but no weights on the bar,
Right.
and you make sure they have the right form.
Yep.
That's akin to creating a rule and making it work in your everyday environment and getting, you can identify when the tripwire is going off. You can make better decisions. You can use the breathing. You can calm down.
Yeah.
You can logically refute what your pig is saying. There are a lot of other things that can put weight on the bar. Going to a social situation is like putting 250-pound plates on each side. It's pretty heavy.
Yeah.
Sometimes for the first 30 days, you might not want to do that. Sometimes for the first 30 days, you might want to just practice with no weights on the bar and really get your form down.
Right.
But eventually you can get to squat 100 pounds. That's not really that heavy. You can do that.
Yeah.
There are a couple of things to know about social situations that will help you better. First of all, if you're comfortable about the way that you're eating, people will eventually be comfortable about the way that you're eating. I don't have trouble in these situations anymore. I take them seriously. I make decisions before I go. So if I know I'm going to a particular restaurant, I'll look up that restaurant online. I will write down in my little Google Calendar note what I plan to order. If that's not available, what can I order instead? Do I have to mix and match ingredients? I don't make decisions in an environment of temptation.
Right.
I minimize the decision making as much as I can. But secondly, there are social forces that you can counteract, or a better word would be to meet the needs that these people are demonstrating in a different way. For example, most people think that the pressure to eat like everybody else is eating when you're in a social environment just comes because they want to eat that way and they don't want to feel guilty. Right. But that's a very small part of it. If you think about what it must have been like as we were evolving in tribes, 50,000, 100,000 years ago, it probably wasn't, what probably was the case was that every member of the tribe was needed for their labor. And if someone would get sick, they'd be a burden on the tribe. If someone would get weak, they'd be on the burden on the tribe. Right. Also, because food wasn't so abundant, there would be one hunt or one catch or one harvest. Right. So there would be one thing available. And so if you said, I don't feel like eating tonight, the tribe would probably say, no, you have to eat because we need you to be strong. Right. Right. So it wasn't so much, have what you want to, or this wide variety of options. It was like, no, you're going to eat what everybody else is eating, or we're going to leave you behind. Right. And so there's this underlying fabric of society. We all kind of know this in our gut, that when you're with other tribes, other tribe members, you're supposed to eat what they're eating. Yeah. Plus, there's a notion of breaking bread. When warring tribes would try to make peace and show that they weren't there to rape and pillage, they would eat together. It's a very bonding experience. Right. And so when you reject that, you're really setting up a threat to the fabric of our culture, to the fabric of society. Yeah. that's helpful so you don't go into battle armed with a plastic helmet.
Mhm.
Now, when you know that, you can understand what people are doing when they come up to you with a piece of cake and you said, "Here, I made it special for you,"
Right.
as you're walking in. There's one more piece of group psychology I want you to understand. In psychology, we talk about two types of groups of people. There are
Mhm.
aggregates and there are groups. An aggregate is a set of people who don't really have anything in common, haven't established any norms for how they behave together or
Mhm.
cohere together. A group is just the opposite. They
Right.
have shared behaviors and beliefs and values. You could think of the difference most pertinently if you thought about walking into an elevator of strangers. And even before
Mhm.
COVID, we would all kind of stand looking forward, try to be equidistant. Nobody
Right.
should, as the, like, as you're exiting, you said, "Hey, this was great. Let's all get together next year." They
Right.
look at you like you're an idiot, right?
Yeah.
Um, However, if the elevator breaks and you're stuck in the elevator for 2-3 hours with everybody, by the time the repairmen come, some people would be sitting on the floor kind of leaning up against each other. They might have developed some song to sing when someone had to go to the bathroom. They probably developed a rule for how often you could press the elevator button, the call button. What if someone started freaking out? Maybe they have a song that they sing. um, they would have become a group.
Right.
Now, this quality of groupness versus aggregateness is transient. So a year later, when they got back together, if they got back together, it would make sense. They'd say, "Let's get together again" at that point. But if they got back
Right.
together, they wouldn't quite feel like a group again until they started sharing memories and
Mhm.
re-engaging some of the values.
Right.
That's what happens when you go see your family for Christmas
Mhm.
and then you haven't seen them for 6 months or a year and you're going back. There's a crust that forms on that sense of groupness.
Mhm.
Part of what mom is doing when she comes running up to you with a piece of cake and says, "I made it just for you, you look so thin,"
Right.
is she's trying to welcome you back into her group. She's
Mhm.
welcoming you back into that. She wants to love you back into the tribe.
Yeah.
This is what we do in our tribe. We make cake, we sing songs, we eat until we have to unbutton our pants.
Yeah.
This is what we do in our tribe. Well, if you say to mom, "Well, I really can't have cake. I'm getting too fat and, chocolate's really fattening." That's an affront to how she's
Mhm.
trying to repair the fabric of that group.
Right.
What you want to do instead is offer her another way to love you back into the tribe. So you could say, "You know what, mom, I ate a little too much for lunch. My stomach's a little upset. Do you have any mint tea by any
Mhm.
chance?" "Oh, honey, of course I do." And she goes and she runs and she gets it for you.
Right.
Or, "You know what, mom, I'm a little cold. Can I borrow a sweater?" I didn't, right? Anything she can do to love you back into the tribe.
Right.
And that's an example of one way you can kind of step aside from those
Mhm.
areas. Um, the other thing to focus on, there are two other things you can focus on in a social environment. One is that, yes, there's pressure and yes, it's difficult. But if you love these people, somebody has to go first. And we live in a society where everybody seems to have tacitly agreed to slowly kill themselves with food.
Mhm.
And, ho, 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 ha, 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 he, everybody jokes it off. But the truth is that, diabetes is up by like 80% and heart
Right.
disease, doubled and
Yeah.
all these diet reversible or diet preventable diseases there's an epidemic,
Yeah.
and people are going out in pieces as they get older. They're having
Mhm.
amputations and living on this medication, a much, like I'm almost 60. I'm kind of getting to that age of life where, I want to live vibrantly and hope I don't have any disabilities.
Right.
But most people around my age are starting to have some disabilities. So if you love these people, if you care about these people, you're not doing them any favors by going along with them tacitly slowly killing
Right.
themselves with food.
Right.
So if you can resolve to do the necessary work to go through this discomfort and teach yourself how to be a leader,
Yeah.
be the first person who really eats well in those environments, that's a cool thing.
Yeah.
You can also bring food with you. Like sometimes I'll bring, I don't know, a couple of pounds of blueberries or,
Mhm.
maybe a salad or something like that, or some tofu.
Right.
Um, you can, there's one more thing I wanted to tell you.
Well, and that's something that's something that we started doing, me and my wife in family settings is as opposed to trying to say, okay, we're coming for Christmas. What's the menu? Oh, well, can you add this, this, or this? It's like, oh, we show up with what we know we want. Oh, it's for everybody. It's not just like I'm showing up and this is what I'm eating and nobody can touch it, but it's like we bring enough for everybody. Here's our, and it's like a guarantee that I know I'm going to have something that's going to fill me up.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And you can eat beforehand and make
Sure.
the meal more about the company than the
Right.
food.
Right.
You can come prepared with a whole list of questions to help them talk. Jay Abraham said, if you want to be the most interesting person in the room, then you should be interested.
Right.
Right. So
Right.
don't talk as much as ask a lot of questions and
Yep.
your own food in different ways. You can also make conditional rules. So if you have a rule that says I never eat bread, maybe you can say except for in social occasions when I can have 2 slices, right?
Okay.
Because remember, you can, if you contextualize it and bind it to those contexts, your brain will eventually extinguish the craving elsewhere.
Right.
I find 2 out of 3 people can do that, and the third person really needs to give it up.
Right.
But yeah.
And is that something that like, how do you know that you're the third person? Is it because, okay, I tried that and I can't just get over the hump?
Yeah, I can't tell up front with any given person, but there are 2 ways to tell.
Yeah.
One is that if you've tried 4 times to make a conditional rule, where a conditional rule is one where you don't give up the substance entirely, you try to bind it in some way.
Yeah.
If you tried 4 different ways and you still can't do it, then you probably have to give it up.
Okay.
It still depends upon how much damage you're doing or whether you want to keep trying, because most people would rather have the freedom.
Right.
But yeah, but 4 times and then I would say try it out. The other way is I find that sometimes if people write 2 different rules. One is that I'll never eat bread again, and another one is I'll only ever have bread in social occasions, and only 2 slices. And then they project themselves out into the future a whole year, having tried to follow both rules. And I ask them to take me through a whole day and tell me what's different than today, not only with regards to their body, but their work and their productivity and everything else about their life. If those 2 fantasies are largely the same, then I find that usually those people can do the conditional rule and try to moderate rather than abstain.
Right.
But if those 2 fantasies are widely different, and people see that when they tried to have bread on the weekends that they just have the fantasy they went downhill, that's probably a notice that you should abstain.
Yeah.
So
well, and I think that's something that and to go back to you mentioned Stephen Covey, and like one of the things that I love about he teaches about begin with the end in mind, is like projecting yourself out to that, like, okay, if I want to give this up, what does that change in my life a year from now? And how impactful is that? Because if you can't see that being an impact, then maybe it's not something that's damaging enough to you, or you don't or you're not being realistic about how damaging that is, so you can't see the future.
Yeah. What's interesting also is that people typically don't project in detail what the positive future is going to be like if they were to change.
Right.
They'll say, well, I'll be healthier and I'll lose a little weight, but why is that important? And in what ways will you be healthier?
Right.
And so they'll say, well, I'll have more energy, I'll get better sleep, and I'll be 12 pounds thinner. Well, why is that important? Well, maybe I'll be able to play with my grandkids. Maybe I'll be able to go hike the Half Dome Mountain next year. Our inner pigs don't want us to see everything that we're missing out on by continuing to eat what the inner pig wants us to have, as opposed to what we want to do. And in this way, you can transform the fear of missing out into the joy of missing out.
Right.
Right? Because yes, if I don't have chocolate today, I'm going to miss out on the mouth texture and the feel and the flavor and the high that comes along with it. But if I keep having chocolate, I'm going to miss out on being free from diabetes and, being a tall, thin man that can act as a leader in the world. And so I actually have joy of missing out as well.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a key piece that a lot of people, like you said, don't look at that positive side of, especially when, when they start to make a change, and whether it's around the new year or whatever the case, it's hard for them to see that positive side, because I think one of the reasons is because there's so many people that are not healthy. And so it's like, it's normal to be unhealthy. So it's like, okay, well, if I'm going to see all those positive things, then I have to be different from everybody else. Like, do I want to be different from everybody else? Is that how hard is that to be different from everybody else? You know, because it is.
Um, but not as hard as you think, though. Like
Right.
the pig will say that you're going to be an isolated pariah and nobody's going to want to hang out with you.
Hmm.
You know, boo hoo hoo hoo. The only way to have a social community is to keep pigging out. Um, but by and large, I find that when people get more disciplined and better with their food, that their loved ones start to come along with them a little bit. As long
Right.
as they don't preach, if they lead by example rather than
Right.
preaching, I find that most people eat better around me. And I don't eat perfectly, by the way. You know, I
Sure.
make mistakes and
Sure.
things like that.
Sure.
But I find most people eat better when they hang around me for a while,
Hmm.
just because I'm so dedicated to doing that. And
Yeah.
you know, I also think we don't have to completely optimize for health. I think that if you only optimize for health, that's all you're going to have.
Hmm.
So, you know, there's a part of me that thinks, I don't know if I want to live to be 120 because all my friends are going to be dead,
Right.
but I wouldn't mind hiking Mount Washington when I'm 90.
Yeah.
I wouldn't mind doing that.
Right.
Um, and so I make a couple of little compromises here and there, but mostly I don't mind being the only one at the table who's trying to, you know, have salad and vegetables, whether
Right.
ordering the tiramisu. So,
Right. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I want to be respectful of your time, Glenn, and so I want to give you an opportunity to let people know where they can get your book and like how they can connect with you, how they can follow you, those types of things.
Yeah. It's all at defeatyourcravings.com.
Okay.
Defeat, like what you would do in a playoff race or something.
Right.
Defeatyourcravings.com
Okay.
and click the big blue button and sign up for the free reader bonuses. You will get a free copy of the book in PDF format if you would like that. There
Hmm.
are also traditional formats available for a traditional charge.
Okay.
You will get a copy of our food plan starter templates. So this is a diet agnostic philosophy. I'm personally a plant-based person, but
Hmm.
we work with people of all types: ketogenic, calorie
Right.
counters, point counters,
Right.
carnivores, um, vegans, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And we put together a set of rules for each one, which you can modify for your interest, so you can see how people might do it.
Yeah.
And then you will also get a set of recorded coaching sessions. I know this sounds really kind of weird and cold in the abstract. And why does Jerry have this doctor with a pig inside of him on? Um,
Right.
but the truth is, it's a very compassionate process. And I wanted you to hear how it took people from feeling, um, you know, terrified and pessimistic and powerless and despairing about
Mhm.
food to feeling optimistic and hopeful and confident in just one session. So
Right.
it's all at defeatyourcravings.com.
Awesome.
Defeatyourcravings.com.
Awesome. And I will link that in the show notes so people can just click right to it and get to
Yeah,
it. Um, and
thank you.
I think, you know, one of the things you mentioned, which is so true about, you know, it's not, it's the way that I teach people as well. And I'm plant-based, but I teach people like you don't have to be that. Every, you know, meal plan, every type of eating that I have found that is truly helping people get healthy. I think they're all against the same thing, which is the highly processed food.
Yes,
Like
I wish
I,
people would stop arguing about plant versus animal and
yeah,
just get the processed stuff out of their system. Yeah,
exactly. And that's, you know, like you said at the beginning, from the food manufacturing standpoint, the more processed it is, the more that there is stuff in there that's pushing you and cravings and and going after you to be a long-term customer without giving you any nutritional value.
exactly.
So,
Exactly.
so is there anything else before we close off? Is there anything else that we didn't touch on that you would like to say, like, hey, this is something that the people need to know about?
Um, when you're starting off, try with one simple rule. It should be something that you could and would do that's not too onerous.
Okay.
It's important to start with the bar low, so it's something you'll see yourself do consistently every day, even when you wake up one day without your mojo.
Right.
Um, when you do that, let's say you decide you're never going to go back for seconds. It's a low enough bar you can do that. I knew a truck driver that said he has to eat fast food 3 times a day, but he won't go back for seconds.
Mhm.
If you'll do that, your brain will observe you doing it every day, and it'll eventually say, I must be someone who doesn't go back for seconds.
Mhm.
Like, it becomes part of your identity.
Right.
And then it doesn't feel like you're white knuckling it anymore. Then it doesn't feel like there's this Nazi food policeman in your head going, you will not go back for seconds. Yeah.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
it feels more integrated into your personality. You just
Right.
become a person who won't do that. So
Yeah.
pick a low bar, start there.
Yeah.
Teach yourself to play this game, show yourself you have more control than you think you do,
Right.
and then let it build from there.
Yeah.
And
then,
read the book. Read the book. You'll find out.
and I think that's important. Is to not try and do too much at once. Just start with one, and have success, and prove to yourself that you can have success, and then build from there. So,
Exactly.
perfect. Well, thank you so much, Glenn. It's been great.
Thanks, Jerry. It was great.
Thanks for checking out the Confidence Through Health podcast. Please subscribe, post a review, share this episode with those you love who need a little extra help with their health journey. Visit allinhealthandwellness.com to learn more about the coaching programs that I provide. All episodes are produced by the Social Media Cowboys, your source for all online marketing needs. Go to socialmediacowboys.com for more information.